On October 18, 1995, an Italian climber named Marco Pantani was descending a mountain road during a race from Milan to Turin when a vehicle pulled onto the course in front of him. He hit it head-on. The shin bone in his left leg snapped in two places and came through the skin. That night, the surgeons were not discussing when he would race again. They were discussing whether he would keep the leg. And 3 months before that crash, this same man had ridden up the 21 hairpin bends of Alpe d'Huez faster than any human being in recorded history. For 31 years, nobody touched that time. Not Lance Armstrong, not even Tadej Pogacar, who tried in 2022 and lost to a ghost by 2.5 minutes. Then in July of 2026, the ghost died. 35 minutes and 27 seconds. I am Sebastian, physical therapist and performance analyst, and this is the injury breakdown. Sports journalists covered that ride as a race result. I want to show it to you from inside the body, because what makes the number extraordinary is not the number. It is the physiological state it was produced in. And there is something else almost nobody mentioned. The record he broke may never have existed in the first place. Let me set the scene, because one detail got buried in the highlight reels. 2 weeks into that tour, Pogacar had the strongest team in the race. By the morning of stage 19, it was falling apart. And not because of crashes. Because of germs. Brandon McNulty abandoned sick. Adam Yates spent a week fighting a stomach illness so severe that he lost more than 26 minutes in a single day and needed a teammate to drag him home before the time cut. And Pogacar spent 2 days politely batting away journalists, asking whether he was getting sick as well. Now put that on a start line in 32 degrees Celsius, roughly 90 Fahrenheit, in a stage only 127 kilometers long. And here's the thing about short mountain stages. Short does not mean easy. Short means violent. So the reasonable expectation from a race leader with a sick team was simple. Sit in. Defend. Survive the weekend. That is not what happened. The breakaway went clear early and built a gap of more than 3 minutes. Richard Carapaz was in it, an Olympic champion and a Grand Tour winner. So were Lenny Martinez and Sepp Kuss. 3 genuine climbers, with the most famous stage win in cycling in front of them. Pogacar attacked after 2 kilometers of the climb. 2. Not the final 3, not the last kilometer. He went with 12 kilometers of mountain still to ride, on a road averaging 8.1%, with 3 minutes to close. Nobody followed. Watch the footage, and you will see the other favorites do something rare in professional sport. They simply stopped trying. And up the road, Adam Yates, the man who had lost 26 minutes to a stomach virus 2 days earlier, was waiting. He gave his leader a 2-kilometer turn that ended his own race, and then he came apart. Carapaz attacked that wheel, got caught, and attacked again, through walls of screaming fans on the narrowest ramps of the mountain. Inside the final kilometer, Pogacar went one more time. Carapaz finished 9 seconds down. Remco Evenepoel, the second-best rider in the race, crossed the line 2 minutes and 29 seconds behind. So what does that time actually mean? The climb is 13.8 kilometers at an average gradient of 8.1%. Roughly 1,100 vertical meters of elevation gain, about 3 Eiffel Towers stacked on top of each other. But speed is the wrong metric on a climb, because speed depends on gradient. The number that matters is called VAM, from the Italian for average ascent velocity. It measures one thing: how many vertical meters you climb per hour. Strip away the corners and the distance, and VAM tells you how fast a human is moving against gravity. Pogacar's was just under 1,900 vertical meters per hour. And here is the detail that made me put my coffee down. Before that stage, engineers ran a physics simulation of the climb. Perfect bike, perfect pacing, a rider flat out from the very first meter, which almost never happens in a real bike race. Their conclusion was that at 6.7 watts per kilogram of body weight, He could climb it in 35 minutes and 59 seconds. That was the theoretical ceiling. He beat the theoretical ceiling by 32 seconds after closing a 3-minute gap. Now I have to be honest with you, because a lot of channels will not be. That figure is an estimate, calculated from the outside. Nobody beyond that team bus has seen the real power file. But the direction of travel is not in doubt. Which brings us back to the thing almost nobody mentioned. Before you can say he broke the record, somebody has to answer an awkward question. What was the record? Pantani's official mark is 37 minutes and 35 seconds. The problem is that when he set it, the climb was measured from a different starting point, almost a kilometer further down the valley than the one used today. The mountain did not shrink. The start line moved. So historians have spent 30 years arguing about how to convert that ride onto the modern distance, and depending on which conversion you accept, Pogacar beat Pantani by a little over a minute, or by more than 2. The most sacred record in cycling, and the sport itself cannot agree on what it was. And it gets messier. The second fastest ascent in history was set on a day that was not a road stage at all. It was a time trial straight up the mountain. Riders arriving fresh. No tactics involved. 42 of the 200 fastest recorded ascents of this climb in history were set on that single afternoon. 42 in one day. Because the format changed, not the humans. Which is why the clock is the wrong way to compare these two men. The honest comparison is what the body was asked to do. And this is where my job becomes relevant, because the quality that decided this climb never appears on a results sheet. It is called durability. Your maximum sustainable power is not a fixed number. It decays based on the work you have already done. Take a cyclist into a lab, measure their power fresh, then measure it again after they have burned 2,000 kilojoules, roughly 2 large restaurant meals. In most athletes, that number drops noticeably. Pogacar did not arrive at the bottom of that climb fresh. He arrived after 3,500 meters of climbing in a stage raced flat out from kilometer 0. Then stacked 2 stressors on top. Altitude first. The finish sits at 1,850 meters, high enough to measurably reduce your maximum oxygen uptake. A small tax, collected at the exact moment you can least afford it. Then heat. And as a physical therapist, this is the part that genuinely shocks me, because it is a plumbing problem. As your core temperature climbs, your body opens the blood vessels near the skin to dump heat. That blood has to come from somewhere, and it comes out of the supply feeding your working muscles. Your heart rate drifts upward to compensate, the volume pumped per beat falls, and the exact same power output starts costing you more. Every rider on that mountain was fighting that. He was fighting it while producing the highest sustained output of his career. So the wattage is not the astonishing part. Producing it in that state is. Which leaves an uncomfortable question, and I am not going to dodge it. If the human body has not changed since 1995, and biologically it has not, what explains that gap? Let me give you 3 answers before we get to the one you are all thinking about. The first is the most underrated performance revolution of the last 20 years. Carbohydrate intake. In Pantani's era, the accepted ceiling for how much carbohydrate a human could absorb during exercise was about 60 grams per hour. That was treated as physiological law because the transporters in your intestinal wall that carry glucose into the bloodstream become saturated. Push past that limit and you do not get extra energy. You get cramps and vomiting. Then researchers noticed something. Fructose, a different sugar, uses a completely different transporter. Combine the two in the right ratio, train the gut to tolerate the volume, and the ceiling doubles. Modern professionals now take in 120 grams every hour. So Pogacar arrived at that mountain with far more usable fuel on board than any rider of the 90s could physically carry. Same engine, much fuller tank. Second, Equipment. Pantani's bike weighed 8.3 kilograms. A modern tour bike sits at the legal limit of 6.8, and engineers calculate that 400 grams is worth about 9 seconds here. Third, training. Power meters, altitude camps, heat acclimation protocols. Pantani trained on feel and a heart rate strap. Add all of that up honestly, and you account for a meaningful chunk of the difference. Not all of it. Which brings us to the elephant on the mountain. I am not going to insult you by pretending this conversation is not happening. Estimated power-to-weight ratios on this climb fall into 3 historical bands. Before the drug EPO became widespread, the climbing times correspond to roughly 5.5 watts per kilogram. During the EPO years, those figures jumped towards 6.5, with Marco Pantani sitting at the absolute ceiling of that range. After the biological passport arrived, they corrected back down, and in recent seasons they have climbed again, past the old ceiling. Now there is a difference between an observation and an accusation. Marco Pantani was thrown out of the Tour of Italy in 1999 while leading it because his hematocrit was too high. Hematocrit is simply the percentage of your blood made up of red blood cells, and an unusually high reading is the classic fingerprint of blood manipulation. He died in 2004, alone in a hotel room, at 34 years old. That is the documented history of the number that fell. Tadej Pogacar has never failed a test. So the honest question is not, is he clean? I cannot answer that, and neither can anyone armed with a spreadsheet. The honest question is narrower. How much of that gap is explained by fuel, equipment, and training, and how much is left over? Anyone handing you a confident verdict, in either direction, is selling you a certainty they do not have. One last thing, because this is the part that should stay with you. 3 months after the crash that nearly cost him his leg, after the reconstruction, after the months when the sport had quietly written him off, Marco Pantani came back. In 1997, he won 2 stages of the Tour de France, and one of them was on that mountain. The following year, he won the Tour of Italy and the Tour de France in the same season. The record that fell was set by a man whose body had been broken and rebuilt. And here is the number I want you to sit with. In 2022, on that exact climb, Tadej Pogacar rode up in 39 minutes and 8 seconds. 4 years later, 35 minutes and 27 seconds. He took 3 minutes and 41 seconds off his own performance on the same mountain in 4 years. Not off Pantani's time, off his own. That is not a rivalry between 2 eras anymore. That is one human being redrawing the ceiling of what a body can do on a bicycle, faster than the sport can explain it. So here is my question for you, and I want a real answer. Of that gap, how much is fuel, equipment, and training, and how much is left over? Tell me in the comments, and be specific, because I read them. I am Sebastian from the Injury Breakdown, and if this one got under your skin, go watch Pogacar versus Merckx, the physiology comparison nobody wants to make. This is not a fantasy. It is a controlled experiment in human physiology, and the result will change how you think about every cycling record you have ever respected.